And we start with a Fox News alert on the race to stop a government shutdown with 3 days, less than really, to hammer out a deal. Good morning to you. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Julie Banderas in a snowy New York City today. How are you? Deadline drama on Capitol Hill. GOP lawmakers working to get the votes they need to pass a stopgap measure. And they are facing oppositions, not only from Democrats who want a deal for the Dreamers, but also from members of their very own party.
It is clear that we are not yet ready to move ahead with a major agreement on long-term funding for our armed forces, nor on our immigration policy. Compromise solutions are not out of reach. But for now, Congress needs to keep the government running. There's no cause whatsoever for manufacturing a crisis and holding up funding for the vital services of the federal government.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live with the story. Has the latest from the White House. Hi there, John.
Good morning to you, Julie. First of all, let's zone in on the president's health report and the results of the physical that he had up at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center on Friday. You know, by definition, the White House physician, Dr. Ronny Jackson, is apolitical. He was also the physician for President Barack Obama and George W. Bush. But the information that the president requested Jackson reveal yesterday was a real finger in the eye to critics of the president who say that he's mentally unfit for office. Jackson revealing yesterday that at the president's request, and this was a big surprise to many White House staffers, that the president had requested a cognitive assessment, this in the wake of all of those allegations in the Wolf Book, Fire and Fury, that he is mentally unfit for the job. Jackson says the president did very well on that test. Listen here.
It screens for any type of cognitive issues, Alzheimer's and all those other things. And so, the fact that the president got, 30 out of 30 on that exam, I think that, there's no indication whatsoever that he has any cognitive issues. And, I've never known him to repeat himself, around me. He says what he's got to say and he speaks his mind. And I've found no reason whatsoever to think that the president has. Yeah, I've found no reason whatsoever to think that the president has any issues whatsoever with this thought process.
Today, the White House still working on coming up with a fix to the DACA problem. They're still no closer than they were last Thursday when the president hosted that expletive-laced meeting in the Oval Office. Lindsey Graham today saying he likes the president who chaired the meeting on Tuesday of last week more than the one that he argued with on Thursday. Listen here.
What happened? I have no idea what happened Thursday in terms of what changed. But I do know how this movie ends, and I want you to know how it ends. We're not going to leave 800,000 people with no place else to go out in the cold.
But sources tell Fox News that Graham and Senator Dick Durbin, Democratic side, had come to the president with a plan that didn't have agreement of the other principals who were trying to cut a deal and didn't come anywhere close to what the president had been asking for. The president basically felt that they were trying to do an end run around the process and sell him a bad deal. I'm told by sources that Lindsey Graham may have really hurt his standing with the White House. Legislative Affairs Director Mark Short said that the White House is continuing down the road of trying to get a deal on DACA and also trying to get a deal on spending, telling Fox Business today he believes that they can get a continuing resolution that does not address the DACA program and then leave the DACA program for that period in between the time that the CR goes into effect and the time that it would likely expire on February the 16th. Listen here.
We met at a staff level with the staffs from Leader McCarthy, Leader Hoyer, Leader Cornyn, as well as Senator Durbin yesterday. I think there'll be a principals meeting today in which those members will be joined by General Kelly and Kirstjen Nielsen from DHS to continue conversations to move forward.
And there is nothing on the president's schedule about it today, but this is the day that the president promised to hand out his fake news awards. There's some rumblings around the White House that many people here hope that the president doesn't do it. Some folks don't think it's a particularly good idea, and they also don't think that the timing is particularly politically expedient. Julie?
All right, John Roberts at the White House. Thank you, John.
So Republicans are now negotiating with themselves as they work to avert a government shutdown without any Democratic help. But a key GOP voting bloc, the House Freedom Caucus, could pose a problem when it comes to passing a government funding bill. Congressman Mark Meadows chairs that caucus.
Well, obviously we didn't have enough people tonight to take an official position, but the general consensus tonight was that there's not support for the current leadership plan as proposed.
Joining us now, Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico and co-author of Politico's Playbook. Interesting to me, so much of the discussion up till now has been, would Democrats get on board with some kind of a DACA fix and help pass a continuing resolution at least, or at least a budget to keep the government up and running. Now it seems to be a Republican intra-party fight.
It does, and that's probably appropriate according to Republicans because they control the White House, the House, and the Senate. You could have an opinion, and many people up here do, that Democrats should join along because a lot of their priorities are tied up in this government funding bill. But the voters handed Republicans the keys to the entire government, and that's the dynamic. I want to just weigh in on the Freedom Caucus, which, as you rightly noted, is a major and serious voting bloc on Capitol Hill.
30 votes.
More than 30 votes, if you ask Mr. Meadows, who you just had on your screen. They have a choice right now, and a lot of them are internally struggling with this. Their president, they're all pretty close to, including Mark Meadows, who the president speaks very highly of. They have a choice. The government is going to shut down on Friday, and without their votes, the government probably will shut down. If Democrats vote for this package, they'll only vote for it after Republicans carry it over the finish line. So the dynamic right now between the Freedom Caucus and the President of the United States is what to watch right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if things go south and the Freedom Caucus doesn't get on board. I wouldn't be surprised to see the President weigh in more forcefully on behalf, urging the Freedom Caucus to get on board, and we'll have more about that in Playbook this afternoon.
So what is it exactly they want? Is it primarily more funding for the military, more guaranteed funding for the military?
It's a good question, John, and the dynamic is actually quite complicated because they actually don't disagree by and large with this package that funds the government for another 20-something days, 28 days, and then extends child health care protection and delays a bunch of Obamacare taxes. What they are worried about, according to many of them that I spoke to this morning and last night, they are worried that they are going to get hosed on a big spending deal next month and an immigration deal that they don't want. They say, listen, we were elected to keep spending low and not to cut immigration deals with Democrats, and Republicans are going to increase government spending by $100 billion, and they're going to do an immigration deal with Democrats, and they believe this short-term deal might lay the groundwork for that deal, which they don't see as something they should be supporting.
But, it's a case where they could win the battle but lose the war because, these government shutdowns, if the Republicans get the blame for one again, that has always hurt them at the ballot box in the next election, or at least the last 2-3 times it's happened. And,
it actually has not. In 2014, Republicans got their biggest majority in the House since Herbert Hoover, and also won back the Senate right after a government shutdown. That was a little bit more politically complicated because Barack Obama was in the White House. Here you kind of have a very clean set of circumstances where Republicans control all three players here, House, the Senate, and the White House. So it looks like Republicans would get blamed. But I actually don't believe, based on conversations I've had over the last 12 hours, I don't believe the government is going to shut down. I do believe that the Freedom Caucus is going to get on board at some point, or a big bulk of them, and it might be with the president's urging. If people in the White House are watching, they should probably quickly move to discuss this with the Freedom Caucus before this gets out of control in the next 6 or 7 hours.
From your lips to the White House's ears,
I hope so.
Jake Sherman. It's going to be interesting to watch over the next 48 hours plus. Jake, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, new this morning, North and South Korea agreeing to form a joint team of athletes who will march together at the Olympics opening ceremony. And California mudslide victims taking legal action, who they're accusing of negligence.
And just walking up 12 steps that saved us. Otherwise, we would have drowned in the mud.
California mudslide victims now suing an electric company and the local water district. The lawsuit accuses Southern California Edison of negligence. One of its transformers sparked the Thomas fire that torched more than 280,000 acres of land, leaving hillsides stripped bare of vegetation, which then contributed to the deadly mudslides. The lawsuit also calling out Montecito Water District, claiming a water main failure added millions of gallons to the mud. Hundreds of homes in Montecito were damaged and destroyed. 20 people were killed.
North Korea and South Korea agreeing to form a joint women's ice hockey team for the Olympic Games. And the athletes will be marching together at the opening ceremonies next month in South Korea. Yesterday, the Secretary of State warned America that if America is still at a fragile stage with North Korea, what happens as the regime continues to beef up its nuclear arsenal? Here's Secretary Tillerson.
With respect to whether Americans should be concerned about a war with North Korea, I think we all need to be very sober and clear-eyed that that threat is growing, and if North Korea does not choose the pathway of engagement, discussion, negotiation, then they themselves will trigger an option.
Joining me now, General Jack Keane, Fox News military analyst and chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. Tillerson's remarks there, not exactly reassuring when it comes to whether or not Americans might be possibly someday at war with North Korea. What do you make of his comments?
Well, I think the administration obviously has all the intelligence. They recognize that we're getting much closer to some kind of showdown with North Korea. He mentioned the situation is very tenuous. H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, who at the same time that Tillerson was meeting with 20 countries who fought with us or provided humanitarian aid during the Korean War, McMaster has said that every single day we're getting closer to war. And then right on Fox, the director of the CIA, the guy that really has all the intelligence and provides it to the president on a daily basis, said to Chris Wallace, we're just months away from North Korea having a full objective capability. That means nuclearized ICBMs. So we're getting much closer to a situation that has potential for conflict.
You talk about how, Tillerson has called it tenuous. The crisis between North and South Korea, there has been some improvement. We have seen talks that have begun, okay? Tillerson in 2017 said that perhaps talks were on the horizon with North Korea between the United States and North Korea in 2018. Is he dialing that back?
No, I think the administration is absolutely prepared to talk to North Korea. However, they are very clear-eyed that they know full well that North Korea in the past has always used negotiations or talks to advance the technology. And secondly, they know they're using these talks likely, to promote some goodwill for themselves because they're going to the Olympics together with South Korea. And they also want to drive a wedge between ourselves and our allies, particularly the South Koreans. So, look, talking is better than shooting, Julie. I mean, the administration certainly knows that. But they also have a healthy dose of skepticism about where these talks are going to go. And if they could lead to something where North Korea is willing to come forward and begin to discuss denuclearizing, certainly we would participate.
And there is good reason to have a heavy dose of skepticism, as you point out. I mean, if you look at this summit, there are 20 different countries hosted between Canada and the United States. In Canada right now, one country and one glaring problem is missing, and that is China. China is not participating in this. Now, sanctions, these 20 countries are coming together to figure out how to put on even tougher sanctions. But it's not just sanctions that need to happen. It's diplomatic pressure. Can it be done without China?
No. Absolutely not. What Tillerson and the State Department is doing, I think they're in the final phase to pull out all the stops, to truly isolate North Korea. As you suggest, diplomatic. What that means is stop trading with North Korea. Shut them down.
And China is doing
completely.
that. And China had agreed to these sanctions. And China began to start delivering oil to North Korea once again. Is this their way of basically thumbing their nose at the United States by not participating in this summit?
No, they didn't go to the summit. They weren't invited because China was on the side of North Korea, as was Russia during the war. The purpose of this summit was to gather the countries together who had fought against North Korea during the Korean War and reach out to countries they hadn't reached out in the past. Maximum pressure on China is absolutely essential. I think we got to pull out all the stops. And if they're not abiding by what they say they are, then I think we should begin to sanction China pretty heavily here.
So you believe sanctions now should be turned on to China?
Oh, yeah. If they're not doing what we say they do, only the administration knows because they're monitoring it. If they're backdooring the fuel, then we should hit them as heavy as we can and stop worrying about it. I don't think the administration does worry about it. The consequences are pretty awful. And I think militarily we got to step up here. I mean, I think we should be hitting North Korea with cyber attacks right now, taking down their information systems and their command and control. Let's assume we're already doing that. It's not something the administration is going to tell us.
Right.
Stop sending military families to South Korea. If war is on the horizon in a few months, what are the families doing there? Make plans to get families out of there.
So you're saying that we should start pulling troops out of South Korea?
No. I'm saying we should not send our families to South Korea with the troops.
Okay.
It should be an unaccompanied tour.
Okay.
Begin to make plans. We have several 100,000 Americans in South
Right.
Korea. Start making some plans about how we're going to deal with that.
Get ready for the worst.
Start thinking about a naval blockade of North Korea. And we just shut everything down, all commerce going into North Korea. Now, this is step it up. But the way to prevent war, in my judgment, is to fully prepare for it. And absolutely get inside their head and say, whoa, these Americans are dead serious here. And that's what I mean by stepping up.
All right. General Jack Keane, always great to see you.
Yeah,
Thank you
good
very
talking to you,
much.
Julie.
Good talking to you. John.
The Russia investigation is not slowing down. What former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon just agreed to do after subpoenas from special counsel Robert Mueller and the House Intelligence Committee. What happens next? Judge Napolitano joins us to walk us through it. Plus, the California parents accused of torturing their children scheduled for a court hearing tomorrow. Did anyone else know what was going on in that house of horrors?
I am immensely grateful for the young child being willing to make that call to 911. Otherwise, we would not have had the opportunity to intervene. And we want to highlight the importance the community plays in providing us with information about abuse and neglect.
Investigators are saying the California mother accused of torturing her 13 children and keeping them shackled and starved in a filthy home was, quote, perplexed that police arrested her and her husband. David and Louise Turpin are currently in custody, facing torture and child endangerment charges after their 17-year-old daughter managed to escape and call police.
If you can imagine being 17 years old and appearing to be a 10-year-old, being chained to a bed, being malnourished and injuries associated with that, I would call that torture. I wish I could come to you today with information that would explain why this happened. But we do need to acknowledge the courage of the young girl who escaped from that residence to bring attention so they could get the help that they so needed.
So sad. Meantime, the parents of David Turpin say they are stunned beyond belief by this news. They had no idea anything was wrong. The Turpins are being held on $9 million bail each. They are scheduled to make their first court appearance tomorrow.
Just in, the former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon has agreed to an interview with special counsel Robert Mueller in the Russia investigation. The subpoena, which was issued by Mueller last week, would have required Bannon to appear before a grand jury. But Bannon can avoid that by meeting with the special counsel's team instead. Yesterday, Bannon testified before the House Intelligence Committee for 10 hours behind closed doors. Here's California Congressman Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat, after that hearing.
We obviously had a long day with Mr. Bannon today. It began by being informed by Mr. Bannon's counsel that as he was attending on a voluntary basis, he was going to decline to answer any questions concerning any discussions, meetings, conversations that took place either during the transition or during his time in the administration. After we explored several attempts to try to elicit information that took place during those periods, we convened on a bipartisan basis and agreed to the issuance of a subpoena to make his attendance at the hearing compulsory.
Well, today, former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski and Deputy White House Chief of Staff and Senior Transition Aide Rick Dearborn are both testifying before the House Intelligence Committee. Here to break down where this goes from here, our senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. First of all, in talking about Steve Bannon and what he told the committee yesterday, we're sort of dealing with hearsay and leaks, right?
We are, and I'm very frustrated, as are most of us that watch this for a living, because democracy dies in darkness. And when we don't know what happened, we have leaks from Democrats who say this happened and leaks from Republicans who say that happened. It's tough to piecemeal exactly what did occur, but it appears as though, and this is very unusual what happened yesterday, Steve Bannon and his lawyers agreed that Bannon would come voluntarily, but once he got there, didn't answer any questions. So why show up if you're not going to answer any questions? Then the House served him with a subpoena and tried to compel the testimony immediately. Well, once you give the person the subpoena, he has 10 days to prepare for the testimony or challenge the subpoena. Translation, he'll be back in 10 days and will be compelled to answer questions under oath.
But he was advising the President of the United States. Can he not claim executive privilege?
He can claim executive privilege in 3 narrow areas, and I'm not sure, because again, we don't know what happened, that the committee is interested in these areas. Diplomatic secrets, military secrets, sensitive national security matters. The committee is asking him about conversations that occurred during the campaign and the transition when Donald Trump wasn't the president, so there is no privilege. And they're also asking him questions about the firing of Jim Comey after Trump was president, and that's not covered by military, diplomatic, or sensitive national security. When there is a dispute, this goes to a judge in secret again, and the judge decides, yeah, you invoked the privilege properly, or no, you didn't. Answer the question.
So he's going to testify to Mueller's team rather than testify in front of a grand jury, we understand, right?
Yes. Now, this is not formal testimony. There will be a record of what he says, but he won't be under oath. However, the penalty for lying to FBI agents and federal prosecutors is the same penalty as perjury. This is a very dangerous environment for Steve Bannon. His predecessors, George Papadopoulos and General Mike Flynn, did the same thing. They walked into a perjury trap. That's where the government asks you a series of questions almost to guarantee that you will answer falsely, because the government knows a lot more about the case than you know they know.
What if he just says, I don't recall?
It's unlikely that he could be charged with any crime if that is a true and accurate representation of his mind. And if it's not, there really would be no way for the government to find out unless he walks out in the hallway and says, aha, I really do recall.
So who has the lead in this investigation right now? Is it the House Intel Committee? Is it Mueller's team?
Well, that is a great question, John. And Bob Mueller subpoenaed Steve Bannon right at the time that he was appearing before the House Intelligence Committee, because a prosecutor does not want a potential witness testifying in a forum that he doesn't control. So Bob Mueller is running the show, and for some reason Steve Bannon's lawyers are negotiating with Bob Mueller and have agreed to produce him against the learned advice of never talk to a guy that owns a grand jury. He'll trap you.
We will continue to watch this fascinating case. Judge Andrew Napolitano, our senior judicial analyst.
Pleasure to be with you, Johnny.
Thank you. Julie.
All right, John. Well, the need for beefed up security along our southern border, why a revolving door is making a shortage of manpower patrolling the border even worse. We're going to have a live report for you coming up. Plus, the battle over immigration goes on with a government shutdown looming. So why the Attorney General is now doubling down on the administration's push for reform.
What the American people want, have a right to, and what's good for America is a lawful system of immigration. And when we admit people to our country, we should be like Canada. We should evaluate them and make sure they're going to be lawful, they're not threats to us.
From Nogales on the Arizona-Mexico border with a look at that. William.
Well, John, it's money, it's competition for talent. Not everyone wants to run around in the middle of the night after people and potentially get assaulted. But also in some of these remote communities, the education for kids, job opportunities for your spouse, those are limited. So for some, it's not going to work. For others, it does.
The extreme nature appealed to me. Where I'm from is pretty flat.
Raised in a small Indiana town, Stephen Engels joined the Border Patrol 2 years ago.
Stopping people from crossing the border and the secondary aspect of stopping narcotics, all of that appealed to me.
After 6 months at the academy, which included deadly force training, the agency sent Engels to Nogales, Arizona.
It doesn't matter why they crossed or for what purpose they came here. What they did was illegal, and we're paid to uphold the law.
Finding the next angles is a challenge for the Border Patrol. Starting salary of an agent, $49,000. The patrol is down 1,800 agents, and the president wants 5,000 more. 65% fail the polygraph. Hiring one agent takes 133 applicants and 9 months.
In many cases, we are going after the same applicants that a lot of law enforcement agencies are.
Hiring new agents is one problem. Keeping experienced ones is another.
It is an employment crisis. We're losing more agents than we're hiring.
We've got to get better at looking at different retention initiatives.
Manpower, technology, fencing. Since 2001, Homeland Security doubled the number of agents and added almost 700 miles of pedestrian and vehicle barriers, mostly in Tucson and Yuma, El Centro, and San Diego. Apprehensions fell by more than 90%.
So reduced the amount of traffic, the flow, migration, and drugs that was coming across the border.
So that's the rule of thumb out here. It's fencing, it's manpower, it's technology. You take one away, the rest aren't going to work. You need the fence to stop people. You need the agents to apprehend people. You need the sensors and the cameras to see people. So, John, all three of those things, if Congress gives Border Patrol money, they're going to spend it on all those, not just the wall. Back to you.
All right, let's hope they get those slots filled. William Lajeunesse. William, thank you.
President Trump pushing for immigration reform after a new report on foreign-born terrorists. Tweeting this, new report from DOJ and DHS shows that nearly 3 in 4 individuals convicted of terrorism-related charges are foreign-born. We have submitted to Congress a list of resources and reforms. We need to keep America safe, including moving away from a random chain migration and lottery system to one that is merit-based. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, meantime, doubling down on the administration's concern last night with Tucker Carlson. Listen.
President Trump has said we have immigration, we want immigration, but we want to vet these people. We want to know who they are and make sure they're going to be productive people, people who will flourish in America, who are going to not be terrorists, not be criminals, and that's exactly correct for America.
Joining me now are David Avella, chairman of GOPAC, and Capri Cafaro, former Democrat minority leader in the Ohio State Senate. Thank you both for talking to us.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Capri, the president's plan to keep out terrorists, as he calls, is an ideal one. Obviously, no one wants to allow terrorists into the United States. But how hard is it going to be to execute?
I think it's incredibly difficult because, how do you really get into the minds of individuals? I think this is an instance where investing in human intelligence, for example, is critically important. Chain migration, for example, I think that while, in my view at least, there is, I think, some merit to chain migration, because if you already have family here, I think it shows that there is a desire to be part of the American fabric and be a productive member of the American society. However, that being said, I think the question becomes how far do you allow chain migration to occur? So I think that, while all of this sounds lovely on its face, I think that we really need to take a step back and look at what, for example, a merit-based system is really defined as. Attorney General Sessions, for example, mentioned Canada. Canada has very strict language requirements, but what does that really entail? Maybe those countries that have had convicted terrorists in the United States will just focus on English skills. So there's a lot more here than what it appears.
David, by weeding out the good from the bad, the president basically believes in selecting immigrants based on their status. How realistic do you think a merit-based system is then?
It's exactly what Americans say they want, is a merit-based system. Much has been talked about, Julie, as far as pressure the president has put on Democrats to come to the table. At the same time, there's a message here for Republicans. 2018 is not for the weak-kneed or the faint-hearted. If we're going to pass immigration reform, if we're going to do infrastructure spending, if we're going to keep the government open, it's not going to be with Democrat votes. They've made very clear they have no agenda, they have no message beyond let's do amateurish moves to keep the president focused off getting legislative victories so that we can go into make this all about the elections and try to take back Congress. This message the president is talking about is as much for Democrats as it is for Republicans.
Capri, so here's the deal. Okay, so chain migration. Obviously, there are people who have family ties here. There is a widespread debate, a bipartisan debate, after Lindsey Graham has stood up for, the hundreds, thousands of immigrants that were brought here illegally when they were children. When do you decide to break up families? But then you also have to look at history. You have to look at some of the convicted terrorists in this country who have come over as young adults, if not children, okay? And their families brought them over here and they went ahead and killed Americans. Vetting, the vetting process, that's already put in place, but is it enough?
You know, I think that the real question is that what does that vetting look like and how do we build upon it? Obviously, you know, nothing is going to be 100% perfect, and you only have to have that one instance of failure for tragedy to occur. And that is always the challenge of law enforcement, counterterrorism, and vetting when it comes to immigration. So again, there's no simple answer to this. And I think that, you know, we've seen a number of instances just recently of families being broken apart you know, there was I think a man in Michigan who is 39 years old, who's been here for over 30 years, and he is being deported back. We have actually someone in Ohio, for example, as well, that is being detained right now, who's been here for over 30 years. So, you know, how do we make this objective? It's going to be very hard.
So, David, for those who are being deported, who have been here since they were children, regarding merit-based, if you're already here and you've been working for 30 years, do you not have a chance? Did this man, for example, she's mentioning in Michigan, have a chance to apply for citizenship years ago in order to prevent this? I mean, they're a different category.
Absolutely. A solution can be found, just as the administration has made very clear to the DACA folks that are here on the DACA program. You know, unless you commit a crime, there's not going to be a police force out rounding people up and sending them out. Ultimately, what Republicans and the Trump administration are asking for is people to play by the rules. Just the same thing that Canada's doing, just the same thing Greece is now doing, just the same thing that countries all over this world are doing. We put in place a set of immigration rules, and we want people to play by the rules. We want people to come here who are going to be productive members of our society, which most immigrants are to our nation. And yet, at the same time, we don't want criminals in here. We don't want to bring into this country people who are going to do harm. It's a simple concept, and why Democratic leaders can't get on board with that, it's mind-boggling.
We need to come to the table, but it's not as simple as it looks.
All right, Capri Farrow. No, it certainly isn't. Capri Farrow, thank you very much, and David Avella. Appreciate you both.
Thank you.
John.
President Trump's former campaign chairman expected to stand trial right before the 2018 midterm elections. Why one opinion writer says the timing could not be worse for Republicans. Breaking here on Happening Now, a federal judge overseeing the trial of former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and his deputy Rick Gates now says they're